You're listening to the PropTech Pioneers podcast. This podcast brings startups and MLSs closer together by exploring the beauty and the struggle of real estate data and technology. I believe real estate is on the cusp of a major transformation driven by better access to data, a new crop of pragmatic founders, and pent-up frustration with the status quo. These are conversations with those pioneers that are leading that transformation within the MLS landscape. I'm your host, Evan Knowles. I'm an entrepreneur building a fintech company called Simba that helps realtors manage their financial health using MLS data. And I wish I had access to these conversations earlier in my journey, so I thought I'd help future entrepreneurs and MLS executives learn from each other in a more open and accessible fashion. I hope you enjoy. Now let's jump into it. All right, welcome back to PropTech Pioneers. I'm here with Warren Dow. I'm just looking forward to this episode. Met Warren through Bill Fowler. So Bill reached out to me and said, "Hey, I know you're taking Simba to market. I think you need to talk to Warren and what he's got going on over at RE Target." And I took the call. Warren and I had a couple conversations, and I realized that he has just such a wisdom and breadth of knowledge about the space. And so that was kind of where we first hit it off, was just as kind of like a mentor and a resource, and is more than willing to help founders. He's one himself and has done an amazing job with the companies he's been taking to market. So that was where our relationship started. And then we actually worked together, used his product, RE Target, and his very effective product. So I want to dig in a bit to what's going on there. But today's conversation is really going to kind of range from everything about what trends are happening in the MLS landscape right now, how the market is affecting the MLS landscape and its members. Again, we'll talk a bit about his product, RE Target. And then we want to dig into how to take a product to market through the MLSs and how to engage with boards and what that process looks like. Warren has a ton of knowledge about doing that. So again, really looking forward to this conversation. Warren, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So your experience kind of spans from Lone Wolf to now Savvy Card, which one of their products is RE Target. So tell us a bit about your background, and then let's dive into some of the things you've learned from that background.
Sure. Well, I launched my own company back in 2011, which I ended up selling to Lone Wolf in 2015. So the transition from being a startup, early stage company, bootstrapping and bartering with associations and MLSs, to working with one of the larger technology companies in the industry, that's a pretty big or stark difference in how they operate. But I've worked with tens of thousands of agents in my career so far and thousands of brokerages. Lone Wolf gave me the opportunity to sort of transition into the franchise association MLS space, and that's where I focus at Savvy Card today.
Got it. Cool. Well, before we get too much into what you're working on today in your company, I wanted to just briefly kind of set the groundwork for you engage with a lot of MLSs today, and you're directly tied into kind of how they make money and how they're monetizing non-dues revenue, members. You have a really good pulse on the market. And so I wanted to just ask you a few questions about what you're seeing out there. So first question is just, how's the general residential market right now kind of affecting MLSs, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way around it. The downturn in the market, and I don't know if downturn is the right phrase. It's just a much tighter market. It's going to impact the membership levels or the number of subscribers to an MLS. MLSs they're budgeting for those revenue drops from their subscriber dues, and as a result, they can't change their focus on providing value to their brokers and their agent users. And so I think that this transition is MLSs are in a much stronger position to handle this because most of them operate as for-profit entities. So a lot of them have coffers to weather these types of storms. There are ebbs and flows in this industry. And, we are at a peak of what it can handle. And realistically, it should probably be in the 1.2 million agent range rather than the 1.6 where it's sitting now.
Yeah. So they really built, I'm sure a lot of these MLSs and associations built up large, as you said, coffers during kind of the peak period where we saw the most agents ever in the industry. Now you said they're budgeting, they might be cutting back. Where are you seeing them, if anywhere in particular?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is, budget tightening leads to tighter purse strings in general. The adoption of new technology, the change in how they're adopting technology, maybe shifting away from full site license models where they're paying for a product for all of their users, seeing transitions to more usage based models. I think that the biggest thing is that MLSs are really focused on using what they have and making sure that it's in front of their users day in and day out, as opposed to necessarily adopting new technology that's going to cost them more money and increase dues.
Yeah, and potentially just be an experiment, maybe a potential experiment to see if that is going to get traction or not.
Right.
Non-dues revenue is something that's talked about more and more as a result of what we just briefly spoke about there. What are some ways you're seeing MLSs get creative with generating non-dues revenue and maybe subsidizing some of that loss of membership?
Yeah, I think that the structure of the MLSs in the United States is a big factor here. Some MLSs operate independent of any association. They might be broker owned MLSs. Some you have a single association that owns the MLS, and the MLS operates as the for profit, the association operates as the nonprofit. Other MLSs are more regional. They might have multiple association stakeholders. Some of those associations may have formerly been MLSs, and so they might have some coffers set aside in case they ever needed to spin out and no longer belong to that regional. So I think there are a lot of factors in how each of these organizations looks at non-dues revenue, but MLSs have two ways of going about it. One are through their vendor relationships and figuring out ways to put products that are of value to their subscribers and to the subscribers' consumer, the buyers and sellers in the market, investors, etc. Where when those agents or brokers actually use the technology, a rev share is going back into the MLS. And there are all different ranges there of how those relationships are set up. But then there are some more direct relationships, and we deal with that with our RE Target program. We manage the advertising for MLSs all across the country, and so that's working with local vendors, regional vendors, national vendors, and that's just they're implementing this, number one, to help connect the practitioners with the people who can provide services. But that revenue that's generated through those types of programs is going back to support other initiatives that they don't have to necessarily fund out of the dues coming from their subscribers. So it's I think the other unique situation that we're in right now is that because MLSs operate as for-profit entities, they've saved up a lot of this money and they don't necessarily know how to deploy a lot of those coffers. And so during a potential downturn, a lot of these MLSs are looking at deploying the money in those coffers into investments in technology companies and companies that can provide significant value. We saw it a few years ago with the Remine investment, which was, I believe, Austin, Miami, and Kansas City. We're seeing that now out of CRMLS. They launched their Venture MLS fund, which is investing specifically in prop tech. I don't think many of them want to operate these businesses. They just want a seat at the table to help shape the direction of it. But this is a really unique time in that we're seeing a lot more of these organizations look at investments in the technology as opposed to strictly a vendor customer relationship.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting. You dug into it a bit there, but I want to hear more thoughts on, the fact that associations or nonprofits, any revenues, money that flows into those needs to go back into, really helping the environment and foster a competitive landscape. And you mentioned that the MLSs have over time been separating out as, for profits. Are you seeing any trends there on what people are learning as that's been happening more and more frequently to try to figure out how to generate more revenue and deploy it more intelligently with, playing with those business models, whether it's a nonprofit or for profit? What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, I haven't really seen any associations really transition their corporate structure from profit to nonprofit, but the relationships between the associations and the MLSs are naturally going to change. Right now, with the lawsuits going on with NAR, that has some impacts in how the MLS wants to be connected, or the risk that could hit them along with their boards by having such a tight relationship. On the other hand, we're seeing more associations come into MLSs because they're getting distributed revenue. So an MLS is not just keeping the money in a bank account and saying, okay, we're going to pay for more services. They're redistributing some of those funds back to their association stakeholders or member associations, depending on what terminology is in market. So the MLSs are helping fund the associations and all of the work they're doing around advocacy for pro real estate or housing initiatives.
Yeah, I gotcha. And then on your product, I do want to dig in there. You mentioned that you are directly helping on that non-dues revenue side by a more directly integrated approach. You're helping them with on the advertising front within their platform. Talk about, digging more into that product, because I do want to dive in because I think it's a fascinating product, and it's also just a unique concept to this industry to rethink how agents are engaging with MLSs, but also what role MLSs play. Give us the high level on, RE Target, and then I've got some follow-up questions.
Sure. So RE Target at its core was not designed as an advertising program. It was designed as a way to help an MLS's vendors drive stronger engagement. So these MLSs and the associations, just the same, are investing a significant amount of money in events, in classes, in new products. And when I first got into this space and I asked point blank, what's a good claim rate? Like, what do you expect for usage from your users? And several organizations use 10% as a benchmark. And I was like, you'd pay for this for 100% of your users, and 10% is a good threshold for you. And they're like, well, we'd rather 20%, but 10% is probably in the range of all of our best performing products. So we looked at it as one of those MLS vendors with with our Savvy Card product. We're like, well, we're already well beyond that. But what would we want to do to drive engagement with our product? We'd want to be where the realtors are, where the members are. We want to be in the one system that they have to use. And that's either the MLS dashboard or the MLS software itself. And so we structured RE Target as a tool that the MLS and the association would use to run ads for what they were investing in. And then COVID hit. And naturally, without having the face-to-face opportunities, the affiliate members, those local plumbers and electricians and the lenders, they didn't have that same exposure to the realtor membership. And so there were these two disparate memberships that had no way to connect with one another when you couldn't be face-to-face. And so we pivoted pretty quickly at the request of our first customer, and they said, we're losing our affiliate members, we need to find a new way to help them. I said, sure, great, you want to sell advertising, we'll manage it for you. And I remember that conversation. The CEO is like, oh, no, that's cute, you're going to sell the advertising, you're going to design the ads, you're going to manage the program and the reporting, and then you're going to cut me a check every month. And we were like, we're a software company, we don't know how to do that. And sure enough, out of all of it, we built a product that was free for the MLSs, which makes it a much faster turnaround. It's a tool they use, they get a certain percentage, and our design team at no cost. So, and then the advertising is this nice add-on. And, it was really important to look at it from a stakeholder perspective. does everybody in the process benefit from this? Well, we knew the association and MLS would, we knew the vendors would, but then you also have to look at, the other stakeholders in this process. How is the board of directors going to look at this? How are the individual agents and brokers going to look at this? What if you're showing a product that is not in line with what a broker wants their agents using? What if a brokerage has a ancillary lending business attached and you're promoting the local bank instead of the one that's in-house? So there were a lot of little pieces that we had to work through, and every organization was really distinct there. But I can tell you I have never been associated with a product in any industry, especially real estate, where when we sit down and we talk about this, the organization controls the editorial guidelines. The organization sees every ad before it goes live. The risk side of it falls away. The board of directors isn't as concerned, knowing that you're focused on their affiliate membership and helping them support their local ecosystem. It's really important for any prop tech company that when you are packaging it, that you can't look at it from what's in it for the MLS, what's in it for the agent, what's in it for the broker. You have to look at it as what's in it for every person in it, and make sure that you've answered the inevitable questions that are going to pop up from it. But that we've got very lucky. It was the right time and I guess the right solution.
Yeah, no, that's really an interesting evolution that you described there, from starting as what you did and then transitioning because of COVID to what you've become. And just to kind of paint the picture even better, it's display ads, right, within the MLS dashboard and within the MLS user experience for agents that is cycling through vendors that want to get in front of those members. Is a quick way to just describe the product, right?
Yeah. And that's a great point right there. We can't cycle ads because we don't want to distract users from why they logged in the first place. We can't do video or animation. Gotcha. So we had to take experience into account, because the technologists who are going to support this at the MLS level don't want to distract from everything else that they've spent years putting in place to get the members happy or the subscribers happy. So it's threading these needles, and this industry is filled with politics and that you never even consider. But it's really important to understand your customer, because the MLSs are supporting a really diverse group. They're supporting their associations, they're supporting brokers, agents, appraisers, and a whole range of affiliated businesses. And so how do you make sure that everybody is seeing benefit? And if you can't give it to everybody, well, how do you make sure that they're not seeing a deficit?
Yeah. Threading the needle is a good way to put it. There's so many kind of landmines and so many things to consider and be empathetic of and avoid. One thing, I just recently had a conversation with an MLS exec that reached out and loves what we're doing with the podcast, and was kind of providing me a lot of insight from an insider perspective on what he's seen. And one thing he mentioned was, in some of these board of directors and some of these MLSs, there's large brokers, the big franchise brokers that have, a lot of sway. They might have a heavy presence within a given market. And you gave an example a little while ago of being careful not to have, let's say, a mortgage broker within, the advertising, the list of advertisers you might have within a market. And you said that in relation to, there might be a large broker that's doing that in-house. Do you think it's fair, and how do you think of it as a company, that potentially a large broker can have that kind of weight within a market and dampen the ability for another mortgage broker to get in front of that audience? Well, how do you think about that? I'm sure that's something you thought about. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I get the opportunity to not only think about it, but discuss it on, I would say, almost a daily basis with different organizations that are looking at implementing the program. At its core, I think you've really got to emphasize the need of what the affiliate membership means to an organization. Because to your point, no brokerage should be impacting what the organization, no matter the size of that brokerage, they should not have They should have their say at the table. That's their absolute right. And they are a major player. There's a reason that they've grown in that market. But they should not hamper the ability for another business to succeed in that area, in that particular market. So we emphasize, number one, we know that your brokers may not want your agents to see this other lender. We'll just call it ABC, mortgages. But if they're an affiliate member, they should have every right to be in front of the membership. And so you kind of walk them through the process. Do you agree that every affiliate should have the same opportunity to advertise to your membership? And that's a point blank question. There's no gray area there. This is yes or no, binary. Because if they can't get that exposure to your membership, it's unlikely that they should be an affiliate member. So almost without fail, we get the yes question, or the yes answer there. And then we walk through about, well, competing businesses. The brokerage wants to promote their ancillary lending arm. Are they an affiliate member? And now what is your policy on allowing a broker, a market participant, to advertise? That's where the gray area comes in. Most organizations don't want brokers advertising. We have one rule that is no broker recruiting. It is a race to the bottom. It is the quickest way to get complaints when you start putting advertising inside of an MLS system. And so we work through, what are the rules here? Does that brokerage, their lending arm, need to be an affiliate member to advertise? Number one. And number two, what are the rules if they can advertise? Do they have to have a distinct business name and a distinct website? Because if not, and you're linking them back to a real estate search site, it's just a back door to a recruiting ad. And we found, I would say probably about 90% of organizations say, yes, a broker can advertise an ancillary business, title, lending, whatever it happens to be. They need to be an affiliate member with that business. They need to have a distinct website, and they need to have a distinct business name. It couldn't be, let's say, KW Mortgages. But, I think it's really about having the conversation and gut check reactions. Everybody's going to say, we don't want this. These are the problems with it. But as you walk through it, everybody seems to have the same feeling that this is the right path. And that might change in a year or two. Who knows? But for right now, I'd say 90% of our organizations adopt that editorial guideline.
And so you mentioned there, like, that guideline, that's that business rule. Are they putting these things in their operating agreements and kind of their business rules and their the way that they govern themselves? Like, are you writing rules alongside of them as you take these new products to market? Are you finding that's the case, or is it just not being recorded and it just continues to become politics? What are you seeing there?
I think that RE Target has become so independent from a lot of the operations that the MLSs are doing with other advertising programs, that most of them are not adopting the same editorial guidelines for this program with everything else they're doing. There are a few, though, that have asked us to write up the editorial guidelines in a way that's consistent with their other advertising guidelines for, email marketing that some of these groups offer, or they might have other websites that they're placing the advertising. And so they're trying to create consistency. Triangle MLS is a really great example. Each of the associations that participate in the MLS have their own advertising guidelines for their affiliate members. And so Triangle, which never had the advertising piece in place prior, is now trying to consolidate it all into a single editorial guideline for MLS-wide advertising. So if nothing else, RE Target sort of forced the hand there just to create consistency across the market as a whole.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I was so excited about kind of digging into this a bit is because it goes much further than advertising. You're creating kind of competitive guidelines and editorial guidelines for advertising, but the same goes for just vendors entering the market in general. So, for instance, let's say, affiliates or board members, so brokers, they have an outsized weight or an outsized political voice of, let's say it's, very large brokerage that makes their own tech. And here comes a great vendor that makes edit, CRM, and they approach the MLS and they say, hey, we have an amazing agent tool. We want to get in front of your board. Will you bring this to market? And you get in front of the board, and the board might be made up of a very large brokerage who builds in-house tech. And they're all going to say, no, I'm not necessarily interested in that. We don't need more of X, Y, and Z. We have these particular needs and interests, and these don't align with us. So I think that what's interesting about what you're doing is it extends much larger than and further than just advertising. These kind of politics and questions I'm hearing from other founders and even MLS execs. Like I said, MLS execs are reaching out to me and saying, I can't come on the podcast and say these things, but I want you to know what's going on my board. And I want you to start bringing light to this stuff because, for instance, like that large broker example, tech might not get into an MLS, might not get into an association because of their board makeup of those politics. And so that's one reason, because I think what you're saying extrapolates to that as well. I don't know if you have more comments on that.
Yeah, I think that the big thing around navigating that type of situation, there will be a brokerage that says, we don't want this, we don't need it. My agents don't need this. I think the ownership of agents is a conversation that could be an hour by itself, but everybody feels like they own that agent. The MLS does, the association does, the broker does. There's naturally going to be some butting of heads around, what's best for that agent and who should be deciding that. It's also one of the reasons why you see, transaction management is one of those few tools that there is a national benefit, there's a state level benefit, there's a local association benefit, the brokerage might have a different system, and that creates a lot of choice for agents. We know agents are their own business. They belong to the association and to the MLS as independents, even though that they are part of a brokerage and have to hang their license somewhere. So there has to be some give and take there. And I think that comes down to the operating agreements that each MLS has. Does every MLS get a weighted share, say, at the table based on their market size or their market share in the market? Or do they only get one seat at the table? It doesn't matter if you're a 5-person brokerage or a 500-person brokerage. Should they have equal say at the table? And we're seeing more and more operating agreements that focus more on the latter, where everyone has an equal say. I think that that's more of, democratizing the decisions that are being made.
Yeah, helps with competition and just, diverse perspectives. So to be a vendor, and one thing I think you've really learned a lot about, obviously, is taking a product to an MLS, engaging with its board and convincing the board that this is something that's needed. How do you advise startups to enter a new market and enter a new MLS and navigate the different approvals needed? Should a founder figure out a way to go directly to a board and reach out directly to maybe board members and say, hey, I'd like to get in front of you? Or should a founder go to the MLS execs and say, hey, interest in technology, let me engage with them, maybe talk to a tech committee and then get in front of a board? What's kind of this progression that you see being most successful? I'm sure it varies, but what have you seen the most success with?
Yeah, I would say that going straight to the board is unlikely to succeed. It's possible. Getting a stakeholder, some board member that is an advocate for you and runs it up the flagpole. But really, the board is not designed to be operational. The board is designed to be strategic guidance. They're supposed to be fiduciaries, and they are really just to make sure that the organization is operating within its bumpers, its guardrails. I think that the best way to work through any organization is to figure out which staff member within that organization is going to be most impacted by your product. Figure out a way to connect with that staff member, convince them of the benefits of the service you have, and create them as the advocate. Once you have a staff member that's an advocate, they're either going to run it to their executive team or they're going to bring it to a subcommittee. We're seeing more and more MLSs, instead of having the standing, 3 or 4 committees, they're now creating subcommittees for new technology, or subcommittees for policy, and subcommittees on all these different things that sit under those standing committees, and then sit under the executive committee, and then sit under the board as a whole. So some of them will call them work groups instead of committees, but I would definitely say the best path to prevent conflict is go through a staff member. They'll bring it to the board if they think that it's something that makes sense for the operational efficiency or value to the membership. And then always offer to present to a subcommittee or the board to get their feedback, answer their questions. I've seen some organizations I've had to do 6-7 presentations just to get a yes to then, or a recommendation to move forward, which then goes into contract review, which can then be months of a process. But even though sometimes that does take longer, that process creates the least friction in the whole system, because you could have a board member that's really happy with it, and what the executive team can do, if they don't believe that that should be voted on, if they don't want to implement it, they can just delay it until that board has switched out at the end of the year, where you have a whole new set of volunteer board members that come in, and basically you're right back to ground zero.
Yeah. And I want to dig in more a bit to like the makeup of these boards. So they're volunteers mostly. A lot of these committees are too. And then do they have terms? Talk about that so founders can maybe consider that in their go-to-market and maybe sales cycles.
Yeah. So most MLSs and associations have a volunteer board, and those board members are often going to be 1-year board members. It's going to be voted on the following year for the next set of directors that are going to come in and sit in those seats. And so the sales cycle becomes a really critical factor in when you're getting in front of these organizations. Speaking to a executive or staff member at NAR Annual in November, to get onto a committee meeting agenda or a board meeting agenda early in the year, like January, February, that's right after those new board members have come in. That's going to be the most ideal timeline to be able to see that process through before that board switches out at the end of that next year. So if you hit the board too late in the year, you might have to redo that presentation another 2 or 3 times for all of these new board members who are ultimately voting on whether or not you should be, well, number one, are they allocating the funds to it? And number two, are they going to promote it within the market? So sales cycle is really tough. I think one of the things that this industry could do, I sit on several nonprofit boards, one for a hospital. I just termed out after 9 years on a natural history museum. They have 3-year terms. And that means that only 1/3 of the directors are terming out each year. So that creates continuity year to year, where it's a majority of the board members are aware of everything that happened in the previous year and can create that continuity into the current year, even though there's 1/3 of the board members who will just be getting up to speed. I think that is one of the few things that could really help founders and really just any technology vendor in this industry with moving these processes or these sales forward faster, is not having to repeat yourself year after year with different board members.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I've been on some boards with my college, University of Kentucky, and now engaging with MLS boards. I've learned a lot about that process and just kind of decision making at that level as a group, and as somebody that doesn't meet super frequently. How do you speed up decision making from boards, because it has major impact on organizations, and we see it so specifically with these MLSs. And I mentioned that they don't meet very often. That's one thing that makes it tough to get through them. Do you see a meeting cadence that's kind of standard across the industry? Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Like biannually? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think most MLS committees or most MLS boards are going to be meeting on a monthly basis. At least the larger ones are going to be meeting on a monthly basis. There are enough moving parts and different players that there are a lot of questions, things that we don't even think about. I'm lucky enough to work very closely with a lot of different MLSs and a lot of different staff members that are willing to share some of the pains that come out of those board meetings. But ultimately, there are two types of organizations. There are organizations where the association executive or the MLS is really good at managing the board to their core responsibility, strategic guidance, and as a fiduciary, like back check or and then there are others that let the board really run the show, and that's challenging. It's tough for the staff members, it's tough for the CEOs and AEs. So the ones that really seem to have the cleanest operations are the ones that really know and emphasize what the board's role is versus what the staff's role is. And staff are always supposed to be responsible for operational, so bringing in new products, that shouldn't be coming from the board. Just back to my original point. Now, that doesn't mean that a broker couldn't say, hey, I really like this product. I want to integrate this into my tech stack. We might also want to think about it from the MLS level. That's a very different conversation than going in saying, hey, I spoke with this vendor and I want it for the whole MLS because I don't want to pay for it myself. Those are 180 degrees from one another.
Yeah. And one thing I've also figured out about boards, if they're making calls like this, strategic calls, and they help innovation move forward, one thing I've noticed, and this is kind of a trend after COVID, is many businesses in general, but boards especially, are stuck in this mind of like synchronous decision making. And this is actually something I think about a lot. And I've actually started to tinker around with solutions to this. But our brains, I think, are still wired to synchronous decision making. We used to get in the same room and make a call on a new product to bring in, on a new investment as a company, as a major decision. We had to get together around a big boardroom, and make that call synchronously. And then COVID happened, and we said, okay, let's just jump on a Zoom call, let's chat synchronously, and then come to a consensus. And one thing I think about very frequently that I think is going to happen in the future with remote work and just hybrid work in general, but especially in this industry, I think to speed things up is how do you asynchronously make decisions as a board to move forward on things? And I think it's a combination of like mindset, but also I think there's new technologies that need to be developed. But that's one thing I've thought about in this industry is just how do you cut through some of this bureaucracy and move faster? And a lot of it, I think, comes back to we think so heavily in the synchronous mindset to make decisions when if we could figure out how to asynchronously get together and get the right data in place and make decisions, that's something I think more people need to be thinking about because I just think it's wired in our brains to synchronously think about this stuff. But if we want to move faster as an industry, any business can have to start thinking asynchronously. And so I think Slack and many tools are starting to get us closer to that. That's one thing I think of. I don't know.
It's an interesting point. I actually think there's a lot of merit to that. I'm gonna have to think about that myself.
Let's talk offline on that. I'll show you some cool stuff that I'm tinkering around with.
Good.
Well, I guess just to kind of wrap the conversation here, we covered so many of the things I wanted to talk about that I think are unique questions for vendors and founders to think about, but also walking through some of those competitive thoughts around how MLSs should operate. I think MLS execs might have something to learn there as well. But to end, I always love to just ask, what are you most excited about in the future within this industry? What are some things that you're getting excited about outside of, RE Target that are refreshing / exciting to you coming up in the next several years or decades that you see as trends?
Sure. Well, I think the one that is most exciting is around something that we all have a vested interest in, reducing churn. And I know that I started this conversation saying that we are at far above the carrying capacity for this industry, but so many of our business models, from the MLS, the associations, vendors, brokerages, we all rely on agents in the market. We rely on them keeping their license and belonging to all four of, or they're paying for products and services. They're paying their brokerage fees or whatever the relationship is there. They belong to their local, state, and national associations. So we all care about keeping them in the industry. At first, we started seeing a few of the larger MLSs really focused on usage of the products in market. What trends could we see that were indicative of the top performing agents versus which trends were we seeing of the ones that were about to leave the industry? What could we identify of products that they're using or not using, their action or lack thereof when it came to classes or events? Were they registering? Were they not? And in doing so, you create this data set that says, okay, the ones who have stayed in the industry have taken these 6 actions. And this is a group of agents that have not taken those 6 actions. How do we re-engage them to get them to make sure that we can keep them in the industry? So that whole idea of reducing churn, we initially saw from an MLS perspective. And my thought was, they're just trying to save costs. They want to know what products people are using and what products they're not, and they're going to cut the ones that aren't. Well, now we're starting to see different technology companies really spearhead this, like a Relevate AMS system. They're using user telemetry to understand how users are accessing the different services, and then they are feeding all of that data back to the MLS and the associations so that they can figure out re-engagement campaigns, trigger emails. Oh, you clicked on that event to register, but you didn't complete the action. Great, let's re-engage them. Let's get them to stay in. It's a really interesting concept, and I think we all need to be aligned in that this is a good thing for all stakeholders. So just because somebody's asking you to understand what events people are doing in your system, they're not necessarily trying to, analyze whether or not your system is a good system. What they're trying to understand is that a factor in whether somebody stays in this business, and is it a factor in whether they're successful in this business? And that's something I'm super excited about. I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves over the next few years.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's something that, as a founder and somebody that's, building a product, we ingrain that into our culture as a business. We use a company tool called Segment that basically plugs into every part of our user experience, from our landing page to our product to our emails, and we're able to track every little micro engagement with our product. And so, for instance, when we launched our product, we spent just 3 months iterating on a very small portion of our product using that usage data, which was our onboarding experience. And so we were watching every little micro interaction, where they pressed on the screen, how long they're on each screen, how many screens they skipped. And we were just watching all of that stuff and iterating every single week on our onboarding experience. And so as a product developer, as a founder, you have to think like that. Because if you're not, I don't know what you're doing. But as a large organization, when you start to extrapolate that out across a very large, for instance, MLS or association, and how people are engaging with their sites, their portals, their MLSs, and you take all that data and you put it together, you're right. You can start to see, what success looks like within that market and what retention looks like. So that's super interesting that more MLSs are starting to think about that and actually, put things into place. And I agree, that's super exciting, because those insights are what lead to better technology and innovation. So yeah, that's a great trend to point out. Well, Warren, thanks for coming on, man. I know we've had a good amount of conversations at this point. I've used your product, and I will say it drove a material amount of traffic to Simba, and we're grateful that we got to use it and be partners, and you continue to be an advisor and somebody that's helped many founders in this space. So thanks for coming on the podcast and continuing to do so.
Thanks, Evan. You're far too kind, but it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.